While we've used memory to persist state for a temporary amount of time in our code so far, eventually you're going to get to the point where you want your application to remember something from a long time ago when it was run. This concept of storing information over a longer period of time is persistence. How do we persist data to still be there at a much later date, after our phone has been turned off, for example? Well, one thing we could do is store it on the cloud, store it somewhere in a server far away that's never really turned off. Of course, there's a much simpler way of storing it directly to our disk, and I'm going to show you the simplest way to do that in Android with this amazing feature called shared preferences. So shared preferences are basically a key value pair that Android sets up of the whole reading and writing to disk for you. So we're going to go through this line by line, and you can see how easy it is to actually store all types of data as long as they're simple, like ints or strings. So here I have just some basic stuff that I'm setting up. And eventually, you're going to see here that I have, for the first time, this thing that says shared preferences. Well, all you need to do is get preferences and set the context mode to private to populate this object with an instance of the shared preference. It's kind of like a shared preference manager, really. Once you have that object, you can then read and write key value pairs to it. So here I've got a particular key that is number of times run key, and it's just a string. And what I'm going to attempt to do here is I'm going to use this to determine how many times my app is run. Oftentimes you'll see this in applications where they want to show you maybe a tutorial or a welcome message on the first time someone launches something. Well, this is how you can do it real simply. So in order to read a value from shared preferences, I'm actually just going to use the same thing that I would do if I were working with bundles. Shared preferences actually has a bunch of these things. If you go to shared preferences and say just get, you can see you can get booleans, floats, ints, longs. You can get all these different things as long as you have the right key. In this particular example, I'm using number of times run key. And I'm specifying, in case I don't actually get anything back, what is going to be the default value. So for instance, if I've never run the app before and I haven't saved anything, the default value is going to be 0. So how many times has this been run? Well, it's going to be the number of times that I've saved it, or it will be this value, which is 0. And here I have some logic that is just looking for, if it's only been run 0 times before, post a little welcome message for our user, and then increment it. Well, after I increment it, I want to save how many times it's actually been run, and that's what I do here. It looks a little bit like Fragment Manager, and it is a little bit more complex, but only by 2 more lines. Instead of just using the shared preferences object, I actually need to get something that's called the editor. It's a type editor, sharedpreferences.editor, and you can get it with the method edit. Once I have an editor, you can then write to shared preferences as such. Instead of get, you have put. So in this case, you can see with editor.put, I can put ints and booleans and floats and longs, as long as I have some type of key to get it back later. So in this particular case, I'm going to put the number of times it's been run for, again, that number of times key. And then lastly, and most important, you have to actually commit that save. I'm then actually showing how many times it's been run on our actual view. And it was that simple to just read and write these little pieces of data in key value pairs using shared preferences. You don't have to use them just for preferences. In fact, I like to use them a lot for just little pieces of data where I just need to store something very small and not really wanting the overhead of writing something to file or to the network. And you can see now when we run it for the first time, welcome to your new Magic Notepad. We see that it's run once before. If I were to then exit the application and come back into it a second time, yes, the counter is incremented to 2, but we never got a toast message down here because we're using our actual shared preferences to keep persisting the state of what has happened to the app to disk.